Welcome to the United States of Small Business, a podcast where the essence of American entrepreneurship is celebrated in every episode. With host John Quick at the helm, join us as we embark on a journey through the heart of the nation, uncovering the inspiring stories of small business owners from coast to coast. Experience the vibrant energy of bustling cities and the serene beauty of small towns, all while discovering how individuals are turning their entrepreneurial dreams into reality, even against the greatest odds. Each episode brings you face to face with the dreamers, creators, and doers who form the economic backbone of our country, all sharing their spirit of innovation and resilience. Whether you are in the early stages of sowing the seeds for your own business, scaling new heights in your current venture, or simply captivated by tales of grit and triumph, you are in the right place. Tune in on platforms like Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and beyond. For deeper insights and to connect with the heart and soul of America's main streets, visit UnitedStatesOfSmallBusiness.com. Subscribe to United States of Small Business with host John Quick now and be inspired by the powerful stories of entrepreneurship, community, and the unwavering pursuit of the American dream. Begin your journey of inspiration with us today.
Welcome back to the United States of Small Business podcast. I'm your host, John Quick. Today, we are joined by Rodric Lenhart, a lifelong entrepreneur and multi-number one best-selling author who turned his small-town beginnings into a legacy of multi-million-dollar businesses. Get ready to dive into a story of transformation, impact, and entrepreneur spirit. So without further ado, Rodric, welcome to the United States of Small Business podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. It's fun.
Well, man, you've done a lot of cool stuff. Take me back to that first moment where you became an entrepreneur and got that entrepreneur bug. Tell me that story.
Lifelong entrepreneur. I'm 43. I only spent 3 years in a job and it almost killed me. And literally almost killed me. We can talk about that. But, I was that young hustler. I mean, my family, we didn't have any money, and I knew real early on if I wanted new cool shoes or a Nintendo or something, I was going to have to figure out how to sell golf balls down the street or make a deal with the guy with the garden to sell vegetables out front, or just do something to be able to buy a pizza if I wanted one. So by the time I was in college, I had already started 4 businesses, legitimate businesses anyway, that are, IRS and the whole deal, LLC. But yeah, man, lifelong operation. And when I was 23, and I write about this a lot in the book about your values and how important it is to understand what those are early on. And when I talk to high schools specifically, I give this advice. But, I chased the money and I went into new home sales. I was selling for a Fortune 100 builder. I shut down the 2 companies I was running at the time. And it was great, man. I was flying all over the country on sales trips and had more money than I knew what to do with, and could go anywhere, buy anything, do anything I wanted. And I was absolutely miserable. And I woke up every day, saying, is this all there is? And I was depressed. I was suicidal at times. And I ended up on an operating table about to get back surgery, and I was 24 years old. And
Wow.
come to find out, it was all stress induced. And if you ever read John Sarno's book, Healing Back Pain, your brain, when you're in tremendous emotional distress, will present pain in your body just to keep you from breaking down. It's wild science behind it, but long and short, I never did get the surgery. I got up off the operating table, refused to do it. Here I am 20 years later, never did get the surgery they said I needed for my back, and quit that job, started another company, went back to being an entrepreneur, and that's been the last 20 years. I sold my last business last year, so I retired, quote unquote, for
Nice. Congratulations.
thanks, for all of like a week. Like most entrepreneurs, I was already dreaming up the next thing I wanted to do, and ultimately went to Brown, got my coaching certificate. So I got my ICF from Brown University and started helping small business owners. So something I had done kind of on the side and informally for a long time, and just put a structure around it. That's where $1 Million Flip Flops came from. And if you know anything about us, we donate 100% of our profits to our foundation, Send a Student Leader Abroad. So there's I am far from retired at this point. I work a lot, but it's all stuff I love doing. They're definitely passion projects.
That's pretty cool. So somewhere along the lines, you also wrote a book. Talk to me about this book and what the process was like to write a book.
Yeah, man. It was I say often I could write a book about writing a book. I mean, it was a journey like none other. It was introspective, putting all of that down, 50,000 words on paper with, these two hands. And I didn't know if I'd sell one copy or 100 copies, and I didn't really care. It was kind of one third manifesto, memoir, and manuscript, and it was, if I helped one entrepreneur kind of battle through those things that I've been through, well, great. And so it's called Million Dollar Flip Flops: Peace, Prosperity, and the Courage to Change Course in Life and Business. And it released in September, and we hit number one in 7 different categories on Amazon. Sold like 1,000 copies in the first couple hours. Like, it was just beyond my wildest imagination of what would have been possible for something like that. And it's led to a lot of open doors. So it's been a cool experience.
That's cool. So what was the big motivation behind donating profits back to things that you care about? It's sometimes you hear about people donating 10% or 5% or maybe 30%. You donate 100%. What's the story behind that?
So our foundation is called Send a Student Leader Abroad, and we are partnered with EF Tours, if you're familiar with EF, but they are a $7 billion company with 70,000 employees. And it's a crazy story how we got involved with them too. But my goal by the time I die is to send 1 million kids abroad. And EF sends kids on educational trips. Think like middle schoolers going to Europe. And our program in particular is designed to send kids who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. Their families don't have the money. They're not thinking they're ever going to be able to do something like that. And it's entrepreneurial based. We work with them, we coach them. We're sending our first kids this year, which is super exciting. But I was that kid, who couldn't afford that trip. And I remember my mom and dad screaming about it at the kitchen table while they don't have the money to send me. And it was that trip that inspired my love for travel. I've been to 60 plus countries on 6 continents at this point. You learn things on a trip like that you can't learn in a textbook or watching a documentary. Compassion and empathy, and what there is no them, there's only us. And it's just things that if you never leave your hometown, certainly if you never leave the States, that you never really learn. So that's really my big why behind why I do everything. And donating 100% of the money, it's a circular thing, right? My heart is filled. I don't need the money. So it impacts a lot of lives. And that's why I get up every day. And I use my talents from business to coach other businesses. I primarily work with custom home builders, but any entrepreneur, usually small businesses under 5 people, but that's what I've done for 40 years. So I leverage that to build the other thing, if that makes sense. And then the building of the other thing is what brings people into that world. And it's a very circular process.
So what's some of the biggest lessons you've learned? It sounds like, hearing your story a little bit, you've had highs and lows. I'm sure you've learned a couple of valuable lessons. What's some that stick out, a couple of them that stick out to you?
There's so many. I mean, I was a millionaire by the time I was 24, and I grew up with nothing. I mean, we didn't have 2 pennies rubbed together, and lost it all by the time I was 29. I was back at zero. Built it all again. Almost lost it all again. Built it all again. And I think if I had to boil down the biggest lesson for me, it's why the book is called The Courage to Change Course in Life and Business. It's not being afraid of failure and understanding that failure, you need a number of failures to get to a win. I don't care what it is. It can be Michael Jordan missing how many game-winning shots, but he's arguably the greatest basketball player of all time. It's like, he talks about failure a lot. And not being afraid to change course. If something's not working, whether it's personally or professionally, not being worried what people are going to think if you change. There's a quote, I think it's an Emerson quote. It says, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And I love that because so many people, well, you got to stay consistent. You can't be wishy-washy. right? And how many people do we know that are miserable for 50 years because they're afraid of looking wishy-washy? It's like, you only get one run at this thing. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to take chances. And your highest good is always on the other side of that waiting for you. And I think I've coached baseball for a long time. I don't have any kids, but I coached competitive baseball. And I always told the boys, who you become is what you get to keep. And I think that's the biggest lesson. You're always learning. Either win or you learn. And who you become as a result of that is the real prize at the end of the day.
That's awesome. So who in your life's been a hero? It sounds like you've had to press through a lot of obstacles, and being an entrepreneur is definitely not an easy road. What's kept you going? Who's been a hero in your life and why?
It probably is. I don't know how many people would answer this, but it'd probably be Wayne Dyer, if you're familiar with who Wayne Dyer is. But if you look up Wayne, he's kind of a spiritual guru, but he's of that like Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson ilk, and he died a few years back. But the entrepreneurship, certainly solopreneurship, but even if you only have a handful of employees, I never had a business where I had 100 people. I always probably 5 was my max number of employees, or I was running it solo. And this is across 20 different businesses, but it's an internal game, and it's the people that persevere as an entrepreneur master themselves first. It's much less about business and business tactics than it is about getting out of your own head and getting out of your own way.
So, I think a lot of times you alluded to this a little bit, but it's hard for folks to take that first step. Why do you think that is so hard for folks? And what's some advice you'd give them to kind of press through and take that first step?
Yeah, first step's always the hardest, right? I mean, it comes back to that fear of failure, and I think you hear that cliche. If you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do? And people have all kinds of answers that usually aren't anything like what they're currently doing. And if you really boil it down, it's fear of failure. And it's typically not even necessarily that they're worried that they're going to fail. They're worried what people will think if they do. And we spend so much of our time buying things we don't need to impress people we don't like anyway. It's just this. You're so worried about other people's opinions. And I ask this question when I'm in small groups. I say, who is the architect of the Louvre? Who is the architect of the White House? Who was the 16th president? Nobody knows the answer to these things. You don't even know who those people were, and they were huge, amazing people, right, in their time. And you're worried about what your neighbor thinks if you go try a business and it doesn't work out. He doesn't care. There's a quote I love that says, you wouldn't care what people thought of you if you knew how little they did. That's what gets you to take the first step.
Yeah. What is it about, you think there's something to be said about being joyful in life? I think, a lot of people, if they're miserable with no money, are they going to be miserable if they get money? How does having a positive aspect on life affect kind of somebody being able to be successful in life? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's mindset, right? That mindset's everything. It's what I attempt to build in the book. When you go through the waves method in the book, which is your why, authenticity, values, exploration, and your statement of purpose. I just read a stat this morning. It was 78% of people are miserable at work. It's like, what a life, 78% of people. And if you ask, certainly for entrepreneurs, small business owners, when they come through my door and you ask them if they have a business mission statement, almost 100% do. And then you ask them if they have a statement of purpose, a personal mission statement, 2%, 1%. Why are you getting up every day? And I throw a curveball in it and say it can't involve money, power, or notoriety. Really, why are you getting up and doing the thing you're doing? Because you're right. If you're miserable at people who, it's the first quote in the first chapter of my book, and it's a Jim Carrey quote. And I actually heard it yesterday on an interview with Robin Sharma and Jay Shetty, which was crazy. But I was like, hey, that's a quote from my book. He says, I wish people would get rich and famous and get everything they want to figure out that that's not the answer. And I've said this on I don't countless shows, and maybe you know the answer. I've yet to find someone who did though, so you'll be the magical mystical maker if you know the answer. But I've yet to find a way to show someone or to teach someone that money isn't the answer. I think they have to learn that for themselves. And it's to your point, if you're miserable at $50,000 a year, you're going to be miserable at $500,000 a year. It's an internal game. It doesn't matter how many miserable billionaires are there. I mean, there's a lot, and you hear about them a lot. They're money wealthy. They're not life wealthy, and I think there's just so you're starting to see that evolution a lot more, I think, out in the wild, where the upcoming generations aren't as enamored with a big bank account. They understand that there's a lot more to life than that.
Yeah. Well, if somebody turns on the news today, it's, doom and gloom. Do you think the American dream is still alive, and why?
Yeah, I do think the American dream is alive, and I'm not. I understand we're only number one in one category out of all the categories, and that's defense spending. But if you travel to other countries, and I've got friends all over the world just from my travels, and how hard it is for them to start a business, and how crazy high tax rates can be. I've got clients in Austria and Denmark and Costa Rica and places like that where it's not like it is here. In a day, you can have a business here, and I think that spirit is still, and not to say that's not true for other countries, but I think America in general has made it so easy. If you're willing to put in the work and you're willing to take that first step, right? You can have a business tomorrow, whatever business you want. And the internet and social media and all of those things that used to be such high barriers to entry, they aren't there anymore. So the excuses to not do it are becoming fewer and fewer.
So, you've had a number one bestseller. What are some practical steps for folks? Maybe they have a business and maybe they want to write a book and they want to talk about their story. What's some practical steps somebody could do if they're thinking about kind of documenting their journey into a book?
Start. I think everybody does have a book inside of them, and how many of those are just locked away and in their mind or in their attic or in their basement. There's a big difference between having the idea and putting the first words on a piece of paper, and I'll tell you, certainly writing, I'm not going to say my book is good, but not having a 39 page, Amazon self-published, having I'll call it an actual book. It's a trial. I mean, it is a lot of work to get it across the finish line. And there's crazy stats. Like the average book sells in its lifetime sells less than 200 copies in the world. Think about that. Like the heart and soul that goes into something like that. And the average book published makes less than $1 a copy. There's it's not a money-making operation. Like you have to be doing it because you want to get your message out, because you have something to share. And I think that it just starts with the first page. It starts with starting a blog. It starts with putting something up on LinkedIn every day. There's ways to get started that aren't as daunting as needing 50,000 words in print. And it starts with that first page.
Well, can somebody tell us where they can find your stuff? Website? Can they get it on Amazon? Where can they find you if there's a small business listening that's thinking, man, this guy's got some cool things to say. I want to go check out his stuff and, see if he's right for coaching me in my next journey in my life. Talk to us about where they can find you.
Yeah. At $1 Million Flip Flops on every channel, $1milliondollarflipflops.com. The book is anywhere you can buy a book, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, wherever you get your books. The audiobook just came out, so that's on Audible. And there's a journal that just came out that accompanies the book, came out last month. So I'm easy to find. And
Nice.
if you're interested in the foundation, that is sendastudentleaderabroad.org.
Well, I'll put all the links in the podcast description. 20 minutes here has gone by in a flash. Any last minute thoughts before we head off?
I will leave you with one quote that is tattooed on my person that says, "The true cost of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it."
Nice. Well, we wish you nothing but success here from the United States of Small Business podcast. Until next time, I'm John Quick, and hope you have an awesome rest of your week.